Greetings everyone and welcome back. My name is Alfred, and in this episode we're going to create our APIs using Laravel to be consumed by the Flutter client that we created in the previous video. So let's begin. We'll begin by creating a new Laravel project. So I'll go in my desktop, and here I'm going to bring in the git bash. I'll be using git bash to create a new Laravel project, and for now I'll use the composer command. So let's go ahead and say composer create, and we are creating a project, and this project is a Laravel project, and I'm going to create it inside my desktop, and I'm going to create a new folder here. I'll call it auth, and then the project itself, it's going to be called lit auth, like that. So I'm going to go ahead and press enter on my keyboard, and that should start creating a new Laravel project. It's going to take some minutes to complete, so I'll disappear, then I'll come back when it's ready. Alright, so the application has been created successfully, and now we have a copy of Laravel installed. Let's go ahead and change the directory and get inside the directory that we just created the application in. So I'm going to change the directory, and I'll go inside the desktop, then auth. Then I'll go inside the auth, and then the later auth. It's the directory that we created our project. And here I'm just going to press the period to open my VS Code inside this. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to just go inside the directory, and now here, when I'm here, I could just do like that. All right, so it should be code. So yeah, that should open my text editor. And now here I am with a new copy of the Laravel application that we just installed. So there are some of couple things that we need to do. First of all, I'm going to bring in my integrated terminal. I'm going to have to hide the debug in output consoles. So, and I am going to be left with the project here. Right, so one of the things that I would want to do is to install Passport. Remember, we said that we'd be using Passport for the authentication. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to say composer require, and that will be the Laravel Passport. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in the Passport package. And the Passport has been installed into our application. What I want to do next, I'm going to go ahead and update our user model. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to search for the user, which is this one here, and I want to update the fields here, the mass assignable fields. So I'm just going to adjust my VS Code to fit the space. I think that's enough. And now I'm going to bring in our UI, and what we need here, we need first name, last name, email, phone number, and password. And another thing that we need also is the user profile image. So instead of name here, we're going to say first name, and then email, it will be okay. And another thing we're going to have is the last name. So let me just go ahead and bring this one in as our last name. And another one is phone number. So let me go ahead and say phone number. And another thing we need is nothing else. So we need first name, last name, email, and phone number and password. All right, so that is it. And what we are going to change next is the user migration. So let's go ahead here and update our user migration. And this is gonna be first name, and then this is gonna be email. And we want to bring another copy here, which will be our last name. And then also there's another copy that we're going to bring in here, and it's going to be the phone number. So it's going to be phone number, and this is also going to be unique. So unique, it's going to be a unique field. We don't want someone to register the number twice. So timestamp, we have string password, And remember, token and timestamp, we don't care about those, but this one thing that we forgot to add even to our model, and that will be the profile image. So I'm just going to call it profile image like that, and this one is going to be nullable, so it's going to be nullable like that. It's going to be string and number, and phone number also it's going to be a string. So first name, last name, these are nullable columns, and the profile image will be nullable. So I go ahead here and bring in the profile image like that. All right, so that will be our fillable fields, or most assignable fields for our model. So the next thing that I'm going to do is create the database that we're going to use with this application. But before that, I'm going to create another field here, and this field I'm going to call it scope. I'm going to call it scope, so I should also add it here just after the phone number. I'm going to call it scope. It's going to be a string, but it's not going to be unique, and it's not going to be nullable. We'll put a default value, so let me go ahead and add the default value, and I'm going to say it will be custom. We'll see what's the use of this scope sometime later, so I'm going to have it as customer by default. All right, so that is it, and it's already here again. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a database. So I'm going to go back to my console here. I'm using the integrated terminal inside the VS Code. You could use your editor of choice, but as for me, I'll be using the Visual Studio Code from Microsoft. All right, so I'm going to log into my SQL, or to my SQL, and I'm going to pass in the user, and it's going to be root. I don't want to have password, and here I am. What I'm going to do, I'm going to say create a database, and this database I'm going to call it a letter auth. So that's going to be my database, and that is it. It's already created. If I say show databases, then it's going to show the letter auth here, database already listed. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and exit the MySQL console, and I'm going to launch my environment variables. So this is it, and I'm going to look for the database, and we created one database just now, and we called it letter auth. All right, and that's going to be our database. All right, so let's go ahead and migrate the application. So I'll go here and say PHP & migrate. And it has migrated our database. So the next thing that we are going to do is to create the clients for our passport authentication. All right, so I'm going ahead here, and I'll say PHP @ and now we already have passport installed, so we can say passport, and then we're going to have install. If you're going to be using the UUIDs, then here you need to pass the UUIDs. I'll not be using UUIDs here right now, and so I'm not going to pass that in. So I'm just going to say PHP & passport install. It's going to take some minutes, and that has already installed. So I already have my key here. You can see I have client 1, which is personal access client, and the client 2 is the password grant client, and this is the client that we're going to be using throughout the application. So I'm going to copy this. For now, I'm just going here at the end. I just want to copy here for that I can just remember like that, and I am going to comment it out. All right, so that is it. We've already installed our passport and created our clients. So the next thing that we are going to do is to modify our user model here. It already has API tokens, and the problem here is that it's using the API tokens from Sanctum. We don't want to use these Sanctum. I'll be using the Laravel passport. All right, so let me go ahead and bring in the Laravel passport. So I'm gonna say use passport, and this one is not our passport. This one it's gonna be a thread, and it has API tokens, and that's what we gonna use if need be. All right, so let's go ahead. The next thing that we are going to do, we're going to change our auth configuration. So let's go ahead and bring in the auth.php, and that's going to be inside the configuration. So here we have some guards, and the default one is web. The default guard is web, and the other one, the guards here, it's going to be web, the driver will be session, and then the provider, it's going to be users. Right, so we don't need to change the providers. What we need to add here, it's another guard. So we're going to go ahead and add our API guard like that. So that we are going to say the driver will be passport, and then the provider, it's going to be still users. We don't need to change the provider. So after that, what I'm going to do next, it's for now, let's just go ahead and have that. So let's go ahead and start developing our application. So what I'm going to do inside the HTTP folder of the application here, and inside the controllers, I'm going to create a new controller there. And this controller, I'm just going to call it auth controller. So let's go ahead and create that controller together. And I'm going to say our PHP adson make, it's going to be a controller, and it's going to be inside auth, and then I'll say auth controller like that. This command, it's going to generate a new auth controller inside our auth controller here. All right, so that's a controller that we've created. One thing though I want you to note that in this application, I would want to authenticate both the clients, or the API clients, and the session-based clients. So it means that then I'm going to have something like the back office in my application that uses session to log in. And then I have the other unplugged applications like the mobile applications that are going to be using the APIs to log in. And for that, we're going to have two types of logins. So we're going to have a token-based login and a session-based login or authentication. So when it comes to this, for example, we have two almost similar tasks. What I like to do is to create an interface for that. Then I'll create a service for each of those login types, and then I'm going to use each service for each type of login. All right. So inside my application here and outside the controllers, I am going to create a new folder here. I'll call this folder interfaces like that. And then inside interfaces, I'm going to create another folder, and I'll call it auth. All right. And then in this auth, I'm going to create a new file, and I'll call it auth service interface.php like that. So that this is going to hold the contract for whoever is going to extend the auth service interface. So let's go ahead and create this interface. We'll start by the namespace, and the namespace, name. So before that, we need to initialize the PHP, and then here we need to have the namespace. So I'm gonna say namespace, it will be up, and then it's inside the interfaces folder, and for that I'm just gonna say interfaces like that. And then I think it's inside also auth, so interfaces auth, and that's gonna be our namespace. Then after that, I am going to create the interface itself. So I'm going to say the interface, and the name is going to be the name of this file here. So I'll say it to be auth service interface. It's going to be auth service interface like that. All right. So after that, I'm going to have three methods in this interface. That will be the register, login, and then the last one, it's going to be logout. All right. So I'm just going to bring them in here, and I am going to bring in the, so let's go ahead and bring in the request class, and that's going to be the HTTP request. And this can go up here like that. Right, so it means that every class that's going to extend this interface, then it's going to have to implement these three methods. All right, so let's go ahead and create those two services. Even though we're going to create the two services right now, we'll only be using one of them, which is the token authentication service. The session one, we're not going to be using it right now because I don't think we need it. All right, so let's go ahead and inside our app here, I'm going to create a new folder, and I will call it services. Now inside the services here, I'm going to create a new file, and I'll call it auth token service .php, and I'm going to create another service inside here, and I'll call it session. It's going to be auth session service.php. Right, and that is it. So let's go inside the auth token service, which is this one here, and here I'm going to initialize my file with PHP like that, and now I'm going to create this class. It's going to be called it's auth token service provider. Oh, you know what, I'm going to change this one. I want it to start with the token, so I'm gonna rename this one to something like token auth. You'll see why I'm saying that. Token auth service, like that. And this one, it's gonna be session auth service. So let's go ahead and change this one. It's session auth service.php, like that. When we start resolving these two, you'll see why we are saying it's better that we name them like this. All right, so after creating those two services, what we can do is go ahead and use them. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring the code of this class, since I already have it. I'm not just going to start typing it again. I'll just bring in the code that we can just go through it. So here we don't have this. We're going to bring it just in a moment, and we don't have this. That's why it's complaining. And we can import the, I think the name was of the interface that we created. It should be here, auth service interface. So auth service interface, and that's the interface that we just created. And now let's go ahead and bring in the helper trait and the response trait. Right, so I am going again here inside the app. I'll create a new folder, and I'm going to call this folder traits, like that. Inside traits, I'm going to have two files. Right, I'm going to have two files. One I'll call it helper trait, and the other one I'll call it the response trait. So let's just go ahead and create these two files. So inside the trait folder that we created, I'm just going to create a new file. It will be this helper trait.php, like that. And then I'll bring in the contents of this helper trait. Actually, it's just going to be, for now, I only have one method inside this trait. And what we can do, let's go ahead and bring these traits inside the HTTP. I think that would be a better place to have our traits, right? So I'm going to go ahead and bring in the helper trait, and I'll show you what this helper trait does, what this function does, when we start saving a new user. All right, so for now, that's our helper trait. The other trait that we're going to create is the response trait. So let's go ahead and copy this I'm going inside the traits folder. I'll create a new file. I'll call it response trait. On the response trait, it's gonna be .php, and I will also bring in the content of this response trait. Right. So I'm going to explain what every bit of each code here does. So don't worry, I just don't want to bore you by typing through each line of code, and yet I can just bring it in. All right. So that is that. One thing I noted, this one I want to copy it inside the token. Here I want to bring it here instead of session. As we said, we're not gonna worry so much right now about the session auth service. All right, and here this is our login method. It's gonna get this user get password, and now it means that we are missing this method here. We do not have, and it's inside the user model. All right, so I'll go ahead and bring this method into the user here. So just immediately after this, I'm going to go ahead and bring this. So I'll bring in this class. This facade is the DB facade that we are going to be using. And remember now our auth clients that we created, and we saved the ID here. So this is the ID that we are going to use for client. So when we go back to the user here, instead of passing this, I am going to pass 2, like that. So it's going to find the auth client with ID of 2, and it's going to bring that back to us. All right. So that's what we are going to do. Here we have the password client is the client that we're going to get from this method, and then we are going ahead and try to log in the user. First of all, what we are going to do is to check if this user already exists, and if the user does not exist, then we're going to go ahead and issue this even before we try to log in the user. All right, and then we're going to return the response. Here we're just setting the fields for the response trait. So these are the fields inside the response trait, which is this one, and they are here. Right, so we populate them, and then here we're going to return the response to the client. So it happens that if we don't get the code or the status being true, here we're going to return the status, which at this time is going to be false, and then the message, and this message is going to consist of the errors and then the status code. And here we're going to pass in the status code that's going to go back to the client who is requesting this response, who is being served the response from our API. All right, so if then the status is true, we're going to include data inside our response. All right, and then the message will not have the error object. And that's the response trait right there. All right, so let's go ahead and see what else we have here. So what we have here, we're going to bring in the properties. We're going to collect the properties that we can generate the token for user. So we're going to generate the properties of this client, and we're going to send that to this route here to generate our token and then bring it back. And here is the scope that we said. So what I am going to do here, if the client does not provide the scope that we need, then here we are going to say if client provides the scope, we're going to put that scope. Else we're going to have our default scope that will be customer. Right, so if they provide a scope, we're going to take that scope. Otherwise, we're going to pass in the customer is our default scope. Right, and right, so here is what we do if this is successful then, and we get the error status code of 200. We're going to take the user and insert the response. All right, so we get the user who is logged in, and we put it inside the response, and we take the response back to the client who is requesting the login. And as you can see, the message now it's going to be just a string instead of an array in case of success. And data, it's going to be the data that will be having the token, the authentication token, the refresh token, and as well as the user object data. Right, or else then we're going to have errors, and we could say just the password or email was invalid. Right, and that is it. And here we have a register method. This method, it's gonna be, so this one it's not supposed to be here, this one it's not also supposed to be here. And as you can see now, here we're going to create a new user object, and we do not need this one. We're not using the UUIDs, and here it's going to be first name, if you can remember what we had in our user model, and this is just last name, email, phone number. I think we called it phone number, and here we do not have code, but we have scope, and this scope is what it's going to be coming from the client. Else we're just going to have our customer is the default scope. All right, and then we have the profile image. I'm not sure what we call the profile image, so it's just a profile image. So if we go back here and look for the registration method, we're going to call it profile image, and then we pass here profile image, and then password encryption, which is inside the response trait. I think this is better suited inside the helper trait instead of the response trait. It's upon you. Just go ahead and scoop this one outside. Actually, it's not gonna make any difference if I just bring it here and just paste it there. Since we are already extending both of these traits, it's not gonna make any difference. So if we come here and try to go to that, it's still gonna come here. I think this method is best suited inside the helper trait rather than the response trait. Right, so let's go back to our service class here and try to look at this method here that I call universal image upload. It gets the request. Remember, it is a request. It's just a bad naming convention that I did right here, but it's just a request object. So it's gonna get the request object, the name of the profile image, and then this is the path that it's gonna be persisted or that it's gonna be saved. And this is the table that it's going to be using to store this image. This method here is not just going to store this image inside the DB. What it's using this table name for is just to look whether this image already exists in the DB, so that it can delete it from the folder, or it can just return it instead of creating a new one. So let's go inside this method here, inside the helper trait, and as you can see, what it's going to do here, it's going to receive all the arguments, and it's going to check the file with the same name as the one coming from the call of this method, and if it finds it, then it's going to populate this file exists with something now and not null, because initially we initialized this variable here with null value. And then if it's already there, then that's going to change, and we're going to have an object or a string for that. So we're going to have an object for this value here, for this variable right here. All right, and it's going to check if the request has file, and file is the one coming from the client with this name here, with the name that's being passed in from the caller of this method. And then if that's the case, then it's going to take that name and it's going to extract the extension from that file, and then it's going to create a name for that image that's coming from the client. So here we create a name, and then we append the extension at the end here. So it will be the name, then dot the extension, and we're going to upload the image right into the path that it's being provided by the other method. And if this one is true, if it's empty, an empty column value, then we're going to just return the image, which is this one. Else, if we have file existing according to this, if we evaluate that and we say that the file, this one exists in this directory or this path, then, and this path, it's actually not a directory, because we append the file that already exists, since we plugged the name out of this object and now we only have the string name. Then what are we going to do next? Just going to remove the image from the server. So we're going to unlink the image so that it does not consume any space, since we're not going to be using it anymore. And if file exists, then we're going just to return the file name. Else, we're just going to return null. And lastly, we return the name of the file that we either uploaded or that we just took from the DB. All right, so that's the upload session, or the upload method that uploads that returns just the name, then it uploads the file to the directory here. Right now I'm just going to upload it inside the public directory, but later maybe you'd want to simulate this or create a symlink between the public and the storage here, so that we can have the file being symlinked inside the storage folder instead of the public folder. but for now I'm just going to concentrate on saving the file inside the public folder. All right, so that's the upload function. So let's go ahead and see. Actually, that's all, and then after that we're just going to return the response object that's being generated here. All right, so that's it for this session. Actually, what I am going to do, I'm going to empty these methods since we're not going to implement them, and this one could stay login, logout, and means that there's one method that's missing, and that should be the register method according to this. And the register does not take the password and email, takes the request. Request is request, like that. Right, so that is it. It will stay like that for now. All right, so after that, it means that we've created our auth service, which has the login method and the register method. What we have to do right now is go inside the controller, and we created the controller somewhere. So inside controllers here, auth, we have our controller here. So it means that we are going to still have these methods being executed from here. But how are we going to do that? The way we are going to do that, we will be using the interface to get the methods, and then we'll resolve the interface inside the service provider. So let me show you what I am saying. Right now, this one is going to be auth service interface. Right now, this interface has three methods: the login, the register, and the logout methods. If we come here in the controller, and I think there's an extra brace here, when we come here, we can see that we are passing in the user model, and then we're passing in the interface. Remember, we cannot do this for the interface. We cannot instantiate an interface like this. So it means if we try to call this method, it's gonna fail. First of all, because of two main things. The first thing is that there is an interface. We cannot instantiate an interface. And the second thing is, how is it gonna know which service it's gonna take? Whether it's gonna take the session service or it's gonna take the token auth service. So it means right now there's no way it could know, and there's no way it could be instantiated. So we need to do something. We need to resolve this, and for that we need to use the service provider. All right, so let's go ahead and create a provider for this. So let me go ahead and say PHP make provider, and it's gonna be inside the auth, and the name of this provider, I'm going to call it custom auth provider. So custom auth service provider. So custom auth service provider, and that should create a provider for us inside the providers, then auth, and then here we have auth, custom auth provider. All right, and as you can see now, here we have two methods. We have the register service here and bootstrap service here. What we can do, we're going to leverage the registration method here, and here it's where we're going to resolve our interface. So inside the register here, what I'm going to do, first of all, I'm going to say it's called auth service interface. So I'm going to say whenever anyone tries to instantiate the auth service interface, then do not give them an instance of this interface, because we cannot do that. But then what you should do, you should get the type of the request. This is what we are going to send inside the request. If we are using an API, then we're going to send the token as the value of this parameter here. And if we are using session, then we are going to send session as the value of this parameter. So it means that if we say token, this class, it's going to read like token auth service, right? So it's going to be token auth service, and as you can see, token auth service was the service class that we created. If they sent, for example, session, then it's going to read session auth service, and we're gonna go inside that class, and that is what we're gonna return as a new instance of the class that we get from here. And it's gonna be the class token auth service if we send token as our auth value from the client, or then it's gonna be session, and it's gonna read like session auth service. And as you can see, it's already inside the auth. And what I can do here, I think it's a capital A for auth. And for now, we're not just going to worry about the bootstrap service here method. That will do the trick for now. All right, so this is how we're gonna resolve this, because otherwise, if we were to use a separate controller for each type of request, whether it's an API or it's coming from the session, that we could say if the controller here will be the controller, if it needs any of these service, then we could return the service that is related to that controller. But now we want to switch from the same controller, and this one will be a better solution for that. It could come down to some other things, like for example, if you have multiple, for example, payment methods, then this one will be a perfect solution, because you don't want to create one controller for this type of payment and another controller for this type of payment. That will just not work, but this one will work perfectly. All right, but we are not finished yet. What we are supposed to do, we're supposed to go ahead and register this custom service provider in our configuration file here. And here inside the application service providers, what we are going to do, we're going to bring in our custom service provider. So what I do, I'll type custom auth service provider. It's gonna come from providers, but then I have auth custom provider, and then we're just gonna want to say class here, class, like that. And now we've registered our custom auth service provider. All right, so that is it. And now we can go back to our controller here. And as you can see, there is a problem here. It's okay, so auth service, name service, we don't need this. It's already there. This one's already auth controller. So this one is auth service interface, like that. And this one is just complaining because we do not have this form request being created. So right now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create this request. So just copy that, and here I'm going to create a new request using PHP artisan make request, and I'm just going to put it inside the requests folder inside the controller. So here I'm going to say auth, and then I'm going to paste the store user request. It could be store user form request, but nevertheless that will still do the trick. All right, so I'm going ahead and creating the request, and here now I can just go ahead and import the class. So it's gonna be, I think I created it, it's inside to request auth, so it's the one with auth, so we do not need that. All right, and now the other one is request. I'm just going ahead and bring this class in. It's gonna be the request, this one. All right, so let's go ahead and see what we can add to this store user request. Remember, these requests used to validate and authorize the person who is requesting and change. All right, so for the authorization, we're not going to do anything for now, so we're just going to return true, just to tell that guy he can go ahead and do whatever they want to do. All right, but for the validation here, I mean for the rules, it means we're gonna have to check some of the things and make sure that they are bringing the correct data. All right, so what we can check for now, we're just going to check for some few things, and these are some of the things that we're going to check. So I'm not going to check for the name, but it will be first name, like that, and email, phone, and password. So for now, I'm just going to check those, and then here I might need to create a custom error messages for this store user. Right, so here I think I've messed a bit, so I'm going to create so this one is just an example. So when the first name is required, it's going to say first name is required, email is required. Email should be a valid email, so if it's not valid, we're just going to say it's not correct. And for the phone number, should be unique. We could say that the provided phone has already been used, and for the email being unique, we're going to say the email is already being used by somebody else. All right. Okay, so that will be our store user form request. But what I want to do, I want to be able to return this error message being the same as the other error messages. For me to be able to do this, it means I cannot just rely on the response that's going to be provided by Laravel whenever some of the rules are not correct. So for me to be able to do that, I'm going to create a custom form request. Right, so I am going back here and I want to create a new request that I'll be it will be acting as my base form request for some of my requests, for example the API's request. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call this one letter form request, like that, and I'm just going to store it just like somewhere outside. It's not going to be inside the auth or anything. It's just going to be inside the requests folder. All right, and now I can go ahead and inside the HTTP request, then it will be here called letter form request. All right, what it's going to do, for now I don't need all this because these are already implemented into the single form requests, but it's going to act as a base form request so that I can go ahead and extend this one from here. So instead of using the Laravel's form request directly in this class, I'll use it from here. I'll extend this class from here. And what I'm going to do here, I want whenever there's a validation error, what I will do, I will have to return a message that every of my clients can understand. All right, so for example, let me go ahead and bring in this class and see what's this complaining about. So I'll just go ahead and bring in the validator class like that. So it means that the response I will be returning for every client whenever there is a validation error somewhere. So I'll throw an HTTP response exception, and I will have my status, and I'll have my message, my errors, and errors will be having this message here, and I'm just going to join the array of message to be 1. All right. So it seemed that we did not have this method anymore, and what we can do, instead of using messages, let's go ahead and use the errors. All right, so that will be the validation procedure for our failed validation rules. All right, so at least we could inject whatever we want to any rules that extends this letter form request. All right, and that is it on the validation right here. So let's go ahead and set up our routes. So inside the routes here and the APIs, we'll be using the API route. So here I'm just going to clean that up, and then I will bring in the routes that we'll be using, and I'm just going to paste them in. Right, and these are the routes that we are going to be using. So that will be the register login, and then we are also going to use create user. this one here. We'll not be using the others. You could use them if you wanted. I'll leave you the logout one to do as an assignment. So here we are going to utilize 3 routes. So it will be the register login. Actually, we're only going to utilize these 2, the register user and the login user. So remember, we're only working with the authentication of the user. You can just go ahead and try to log out the user and see how is that going to be for you. All right, so here we should have the auth controller. So I'm just going to go ahead and import the controller. All right, and now we can go ahead and try to log in our user. For now, I'll be using Postman. When we finish with the registration and the login, we're going to connect this API with our front-end Flutter application that we had already created. So for now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to launch my Postman. Here in Postman, I've already created a collection, and this collection I called it auth, letter auth, and inside it you see I have a user folder, and inside this user folder I have a post folder, and inside the post folder now I have the register user request and the login request. All right, so we'll start definitely by the register user request, and here as you can see I've already created an environment, and I have 2 environments. I have dev letter, which is on the development environment, and then I have live environment. We're not going to be using the live environment for now. We'll only be using the development environment, and if you see here I've already selected the development environment. When you go inside the environment itself, you're going just to get the base URL, and I am having that in the initial value. It's the local host 8000. I'll be serving the application through the native PHP server on my machine, and here I'm just using the IP address instead of using the local host here. All right, and that's already set, so we can just go back to collection here, and in the register post request here you can see I've already provided some headers. The first header will be accept application JSON, and the one is the mode part, and the third one is the content type. That will be application of form URL encoded. All right, fine. So let's go ahead and get inside the body here. Body here, I'm going to send form data. This will help me to be able to select the type of this variable here, whether it's a file. Remember, we're going to be sending an image in this class, so we need to have a way to select the file, and that's why I set the form data as my selection here. All right, so let's go ahead and try this one out. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to say first name. Remember, we are required to send the first name, last name, then we need email, and we need what else we need. Let's go ahead and check what else we need from here. I'll go inside the user here. First name, last name, phone number, scope, profile, email, profile image, and then email. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to have them side by side. So here I have email, and then I'm going to have scope, and then profile image. I think it's going to be what, password, and maybe password confirm. I'm not sure if I need password. Yeah, password confirm. Gonna be password confirm. So first name will be me, last name will be me, email will be me at me.com, and scope, it's gonna be customer, and profile image for now I'm just gonna leave it blank. This one will be 1 2 3 4 5 6, and let me go ahead and confirm this one 1 2 3 4 5 6. And for that to be able to work, I'll come back here and run my server. So I'll say PHP arts and solve, and I'm gonna provide the host. It's gonna be 0000, so that I run it inside my using my IP address, or the IP address of this machine here, and I'm also gonna pass in the port. It's gonna be 8000. If you remember that what we've set inside our postmark here we set 8000. Right, so after clicking on the enter key on the keyboard, let me see, PHP adds and serve, it should be serve, not server. Alright, and now the server is running on port 8000, and let me try to send in this request. And as you can see now, we have a connection. We are now connected to, so I'm going to collapse the sidebar, and here it's saying that class auth service not found. You know why? Because we are supposed to send the auth variable here. So auth, and we're supposed to send token. So now it will be resolved. This one's coming from the provider. It's telling us that we cannot resolve the auth service because this value here was empty. So let's go ahead and try to send that in. Token auth service was not found. So let's go ahead and bring in the sidebar and try to see what's the name here. So the name is inside the services, then we have token auth service. And what about the here, what we said inside services, I think we do not have auth here, so it's only services, so we do not have the auth part. So let's go ahead and try this one more time. Okay, so interface, it's saying that auth service interface not found. Interfaces auth service interface, and that should be coming still from the same. So let's try to dump offload our files, because this class, the interface class, we created it manually. So what I'm going to do is composer dump offload. Let's see if it's going to find to set our class. Alright, so let's try to repeat the action again and see what will happen. So I go back to Postman here, and I'll try to reload the request again, and still it's not found. So I had some typos when I was creating the interface, and I typed the wrong namespace. I've just corrected it, and it can now be found. But let's see what it's gonna do next. So let's try to run the request again, and I'm going here, and I'll just run the request, and we have to get interfaces auth service interface is not instantiable while building. So this one must be coming from the custom auth provider. So let's go ahead and see what's happening. So let's go and see the custom auth service provider, and it's saying this auth service interface cannot be instantiated. I'm going to delete this, and then I'm going ahead and try to import this class. The class is not found. Alright, so I'll say auth service should be auth service interface. It's not, this one looks weird. Interface is auth. I wonder why it's I'll try to retype the class again. So auth service interface should be this one. I think that's the correct one, and in that case I think I might be having some other issues also. For example, in here, this class I think should be same as this, so should be using this. Auth service interface instead. I think that we're going to be having same problem. No, this one's okay. And in our controller here, let's just make sure that we are using the correct interface, and I think here we are using the correct interface, so we can get rid of this. We can get rid of all of these. We can get rid of this. So I am going to try to run the application again, send the request, and now we have a positive response. So we told that the status is false, and this is a validation error because we can see unprocessed content, which means that we are missing some fields. So let's go ahead and bring in the phone number. So let me go here and say phone. I'm not sure what we call the phone field. It should be phone number. So I should be able to go to auth controller and go to through phone request. It should be phone, and this one should be phone, right? So set that. So I'll copy the phone number and bring it here. I'll pass in 1 2 3 4 5 6 10, and I'm going to send the request. The password confirmation does not match, right? So it means that this one should be password confirmation. So I'm just going to have it password confirmation. I'll send in the request again. So I'll control enter on my keyboard. And record first name cannot be null. So first name I have it, last name I have it. Let's see. So in our token service, that's where the problem should be. So token auth service here, and in register I'm saying first name request. This one should be first name, and last name should be last name. Email should be email. Phone should be phone number, and scope should be scope. Profile image should be profile image. Password is password. Yeah, like that. Go back to, I'm going to close this, then go ahead here and resend the, and now as you can see you have registered successfully. Login to continue. All right, so what I want to do now, I want to send the same request with the same email and phone number, and it's gonna say that the email is already being used by somebody else. All right, so what I need to do, I want to text the image. So I'm going to select a file from my PC. So I'll try to select an image. I'll go ahead and select this file. And if the file is selected, I'm going to change the image. So me, and the phone number, it's going to be 4 for now. And now I'll try to send this request, right? So go ahead and try to send that. You have registered successfully. So if I come here in my public folder, I should be able to have the image there, and we have the upload folder here, and here we have the image that we uploaded, right? So that is it for the registration. But there is something I want to do before we close this episode. First of all, I would want to log in. So let's try to log in. So for example, we registered with this, and this is the email. So I'm going ahead and let me expand this a bit. So I'm going to the login here, and what they want is the email, and this is the email that I used. Another thing they want is password, and I used 1 2 3. No, I used 1 2 3 4 5 6. And another thing they also need is the auth, which is token for now, and I'm going to send this. The root login user. Okay, I think this is not login user, it's login, and I'm going to send that. And as you can see, they are saying password or email is invalid. So I am not sure as to why that should be invalid. I'm just using the same email as the one that I had already used when I was doing the registration. As you can see, it's the same. So let's just confirm that we are being saved in the DB. So I'll go in my DB and I'll say my SQL, and here I'll pass the user, and the user will be root. We don't have password for root. I'll say use later auth, and that's the database that's being used. And now I'm going to select select star from users. I will collapse the sidebar, and as you can see, we already have a user, me@me.com, and password is that, and this one has image, which is the second one. So let me try to log in using the first one, me@me.com. So I'll bring back the font size, and I'll try login using the first one. So here I'll say me@me.com. I'll use the same password, 123456. I'll send. Still the same. I think what we can do, let's go ahead and try to debug the application and see what the problem could be. So here in the login, I'm going to bring in the debugger. So I'll set my breakpoints. I'll set there, and then I'll set another breakpoint at this point here. So I have two breakpoints, and then what I'm going to do, I'm going to F5. So I press F5. That should bring in my debugger. And before that, I need to choose what I need to debug. So okay. So I'll quit this one first, then I'll start debug, and then I'll go into my service stock here. So I'll set my breakpoints there, and then I'll try to send the request again from here, and that should be caught in my debugger. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to step again, and now I'll check because this means that this is not returning 200, returning something else. So I'm going here, and as you can see here, I'm not sure if you can see, it's the problem is that it's saying error invalid scope. How did I miss that? Right, so it means that we are missing a scope here, or we are getting invalid scope. And if you hover here, you can see the scope that we provided was customer, but Passport does not understand that kind of scope that we have. All right, so I'm going to break the debugger here, and I'm going to go back to my folders here on the project folder structure here, and inside our providers. So just check for the providers. Inside the providers here, there is one provider called Auth Service Provider here, and inside here we want to define the default scope for our Passport. So inside the put method, I'm going to bring in the scope, and I should bring in the Passport as well. All right, like that. Another thing I can do for now is to, not important, I'm going to define some of the scopes that we might have by default. So I'm going to set these, the customer, the supplier, the employee, but we're not going to use this. So the importance of scope is that, for example, if I have a single application like the Android application that we had already created, and I can use this application with multiple types of clients. For example, you can use the same application to log in your customers, and suppliers can also use the same application to log in, and employee can also use the same application to log in. So these scopes here will define, or they will dictate what the client is going to see when they log into your application. So for example, when the scope is customer, you're going to switch this user to the customer view. If it's supplier or if it's employee, then you're going to switch them accordingly to their respective pages or views. So that's the importance of using these scopes. All right, so later we'll see how scopes are used together with the authorizations and Kate to be able to access some of the resources of the application. But this is the main usage, that you can route your users according to their scopes. All right, so but we'll be looking at scopes and gates and authorizations, or we will start looking at the rules and permissions, right? Okay, so let's continue. Now we've already defined our default scope here. Let's go ahead and try to resend the request again from the client. And here I'll try to set the same request. All right, and as you can see now, we have a token. We have a token, we have a refresh token, and we have the user object. Great. But now we need to do one thing. We need to handle our errors in case the application was not able to provide the required response. In that case, what do we do? Right now, we have the happy scenario here. We log in successfully and we provided with our authentication data here. Let's assume that for some reasons, our server was not able to fulfill the request of the client. And that time then, it's gonna need to send back the right response or the right error response. So for example, let's say, for example, we make a mistake here, or this user here does not return the expected value. As you can see, we would have used try catch here, but I don't want to go and use try catch everywhere in my methods. Well, let's try this. I am going to say this user will be given by the user. Well, email D or email ID, if you would like. Email ID is the incoming email. We do not have this column in our database. If you can query let me close the console. And if you can query our data here, we do not have this column called email ID. And due to that, this should return an error to our client. So let's see what kind of error it's gonna bring to us. This is the kind of error that's gonna come. It's very hard for the guy who is working on the front end to know how to tackle this error. It has so much information, and it's tricky to deal with this. So what will happen is that if we set this error like this, maybe it's gonna crash the application. We do not want that. So instead of returning the default error that Laravel returns every time it can handle the request or anytime it gets an exception inside the code, we can do better. We can create a custom error class and then use the error class to return a uniform error message to our front-end guy. All right, so let's go ahead and create that error class. So we leave that as is. And inside our exceptions here, we're going to create one file. I'll call this file error.php. All right. So this is the class that's going to be responsible for logging our error and dispersing the error to the right channel that I would want to define maybe in the later date, and also returning some response to our user. So I'm going to paste in the contents of this class. It's a very simple class. We have a constructor here which receives the status. It's going to be either true or false, and the status code. And then we have the error itself, which is going to be the error is a string, and we also have some helper message here to try and trace where the error is arising from. And then we're gonna just have this function here, and inside this function what we're gonna do, we're gonna log in the trace. We're gonna log in the error itself and the trace information that we receive from here, and then we are going to return back the response to the client. All right, okay, so let's go ahead and see how we can use this class. To use this class, we go inside the Laravel's handler class, and this is the class that handles the errors that arise in the Laravel application. And here inside the register, what I am going to do, I am going to bring one method. Now we have this reportable, and we have another method which is renderable, and that's the method that we are going to use to return the error to our client. And this is the renderable method here. So it's gonna receive a throwable, and what we are just going to do, we're going to hold our error here, and we're going to instantiate our error class that we just created here. Is, if you can remember, just a moment ago, this one here. And inside the handler, we're going to just populate this class is constructor with this information here. We are going to get the exception that's being thrown at this point. We get the code we get the trace, we get the message, and if there is no message, then we're going just to populate our own custom message saying an error occurred, please try again later. All right, and then we're going to return the response that's coming from the error class. All right, so let's go ahead and try this one out. So remember the error we introduced in our application, this one here. Let's go ahead and see how it's gonna be when we have a custom error handler, and this is how that error is gonna be. And this is the template that we gonna be using everywhere to return the error messages, so that the client does not get confused, or someone or the guy who is implementing the front end does not get confused on what kind of error it's going to be returned. All right, so for example, now as you can see, we are saying column not found where clause. What if we created another error? For example, let's say in the token auth service here, let's go ahead and bring in another type of error. So let's have that as is. And here I want to say I will introduce an error here. So I'll say error, which is new users. Given that we do not have the class users anywhere, so I'm going to run my application again with the class that does not exist anywhere. All right, and we're going to see what we get in response. So I'm going to send this one in. And now, as you can see, we get the same format, the same template, but now the error message changed. It says that the class users not found. So this is the kind of message that it's going to be sent in every error, and that the client can predict the template or the format of the error message and can act upon that message accordingly. So that's the API point. We're going to stop here in this video. When we come back in the next video, we are going to connect our Flutter client to this API that we've just completed creating. So if we send a login details without any error being introduced in the application, we get this data here. This is the data that we are going to be receiving when we get a success message. And as you can see, all the success messages will be the same. So the client, it will be very easy for the client who is consuming our APIs to understand the structure of the error response and the structure of the error of the success response. All right, so we're gonna stop here. Thank you very much for being with me on this one. When we come back, we'll just connect our Flutter client to the Laravel API that we've just created.